Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this webinar, A Feminist Perspective on Financing Militarization. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. White Plus is a European feminist network of women's rights advocates, gender specialists, women's rights organizations, and development NGOs. It focuses currently on migrant women's rights, intersectional feminist movement building, gender just trade policies, and feminist economic issues such as digital economy. This event is actually part of a larger event, and it's the new Webseminar series, Feminist Reflections to Promote Peace in Ukraine and Beyond. So after this webinar, we would like you to check out our other webinars. You can find this on our LinkedIn page and our Facebook page and our website. So the reason why we wanted to focus on this topic is that war is the most extreme form of violent patriarchy and nationalism against which we as feminists struggle. So from a feminist perspective, we want to discuss in this series what strategies there are that exist to promote peace building and what we can do to minimize the harm to women and girls, especially regarding conflict-related sexual violence, human trafficking, and any other form of gender-based violence. I am Deniz Ceren Canlı, and I will be moderating this session. I'm a previous intern of White Plus and a Global Studies master's student at University of Gothenburg, and I'm currently started working as a project assistant at a Turkish NGO named Webseminar. I have been passionate about creating social impact, specifically focusing on gender equality, and during my undergraduate, I studied international relations and minored in sociology. I have specializations in gender studies, global political economy, and global learning leadership program. Before I start introducing the topic and the valuable speakers of this webinar, I would like to briefly mention some practicalities. For this webinar, we have around 1.5 to 2 hours, and after our speakers' contributions, there will be time to answer any questions. If you want to ask or comment, have a question, you can use the chat section in the bottom of your panel. You can also use that if you would like to share your work related to this webinar. In hope that we have enough time for all the questions, we would also facilitate live contributions from the audience. And we would like you to kindly indicate your question and comment in the chat. This is also a live streamed webinar on YouTube, and we will make this webinar content available afterwards. If you want to remain anonymous while asking a question or comment, we suggest you can rename yourself as anonymous. And as we are committed to a civilized feminist exchange and interaction, as organizers, we reserve our right to exclude anyone who uses offensive or discriminatory language or who abuses the space in an undemocratic or anti-feminist way. So to talk about this webinar, we want to provide insights on the impact of military spending from a feminist perspective. Military spending worldwide has been consecutively increasing for the past 7 years. And we noticed that with the Russian government's invasion to Ukraine, European governments have been delivering weapons to Ukraine, as well as increasing their defense budget in the name of national security. With our valuable speakers, we want to understand if the increase of the weapon delivery and military budget spending will prolong the war and what this means for social welfare and on gender equality. I will briefly introduce our speakers, and their full bios will be shared in the chat. Anne-Marie Sancar is a network coordinator at Peace Women across the globe. She's an expert on and is passionate about feminist perspectives on political hotspots, debates on social justice and sustainability, feminist peace politics, and gender justice in development cooperation. Anne-Floor Dekker is a program manager for gender, peace, and security at Women Equals Men, and it's a Dutch gender platform, and she advocates for freedom and equal rights of all people, gender justice in conflict-affected countries, and meaningful participation of women and girls in peace processes. Heidi Menzold is a member of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She's a peace movement and transnational political activist since the 1970s, and she focuses on working on alternatives to traditional security politics. As I began my introduction, now I will start with the questions. My first question is to all of the speakers. And my first question is, how do you interpret the Women, Peace, and Security framework? Heidi, you may start.
Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be with you this evening, and I would like to start with the little framing of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, because it did not start in 2000 with the establishment of the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the follow-up resolutions. It started, and I could start much earlier, but I would like to start in the beginning of the 20th century, because these three major points, participation, protection, and prevention, appeared already also in the founding process, for example, of WILF. In 1915, the women struggled for their participation in elections, and they had to do this with a clear analysis of the power relationship and really a will to change. The protection was already active, their interest this time, protection from male dominance, from violence, from exclusion, from exploitation, and also this third column of the prevention of conflict and future wars. This was in the middle of World War I, but the women already wanted at this time to prevent future wars. And the strategies also are very similar already in the beginning of the century, because they analyzed this triangle of militarism, patriarchy, and capitalism that you already mentioned, and which is still a kind of framework for our analysis today. The methods are also still very actual: peace education, law enforcement, to shed a light on the human impact, on the social work and empowerment, on solidarity and cross-border activities. And one major point, which is still a key element of the Women, Peace and Security agenda today, is disarmament, and also multilateralism, to get it against nationalistic views. So what we can see over all this 100 years is that these elements were against mostly a societal mainstream, and especially back in war times, all these kind of marginalized approaches are still, they are more important than ever. Of course, already in the beginning, the women were refused to have a voice in negotiations. The doors in Versailles remained closed for these women. In the revolution that we had in Germany in the 1818 and 19, the women were kind of marginalized. There were alliances of workers, farmers, soldiers, but not women. In 1933, with the fascism, the organization and this Women, Peace and Security agenda was forbidden, and the women ended up in exile or in concentration camps. And where are we now? When it comes to negotiations, it's still a problem. So to end this, my short historical idea was 1995, the Beijing conference on peace and development agenda this was the last international women's peace conference, and the agenda was very much similar to the Women, Peace and Security agenda. CEDAW, the SDGs, local networks on the NAPS, the ATT treaty, and so on, is a follow-up of initiatives always remaining actual as 100 years ago. And here we are, and here we go, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this historical point of view. And now we will have the answers from Anne-Fleur.
Thank you so much, Denise. And also thank you, Heidi, for giving this context. To build on that context, I think it's for Women Equals Men, which is a platform of organizations that work on women, peace and security, or rather gender, peace and security. We see that the women, peace, security agenda, it helped at the international level to raise awareness about the need to first and foremost invest in the prevention of armed conflicts, and also the need to include women and girls in peace and security processes if you want to realize sustainable peace and an accessible security and justice sector. But at the same time, we see that women, peace, security still is an afterthought. So including women and girls, it's really something that is not, in the system of almost everyone at decision-making level. And we even see that there's a growing tendency of cherry picking by UN member states that also signed Resolution 1325 and also the follow-up resolutions. So instead of preventing violent conflicts, they try to make war more safe for women, or even make war also something women should participate in. So in order to make sure that the full agenda is being implemented, I think it's really super important that all of the women's organizations that advocate for the Women, Peace, Security Resolution, also during Beijing, in the first place, continue to be closely engaged in the implementation of the Women, Peace, Security agenda. They need to hold their governments accountable on the implementation of the full agenda. And it also remains super important to keep the red lines and push back on the pushback that we see by non-Women, Peace, Security friendly states or states that try to instrumentalize the Women, Peace, Security agenda, such as, for example, also Russia. So I think civil society still has a major role to play to make sure the Women, Peace, Security agenda is properly implemented.
Thank you very much. It's an important point that we do include civil society in these discussions. So Anne-Marie, will you answer this question as well? Thank you. You're currently on mute.
Yeah, I think what Anne-Fleur just said at the end, the cherry picking and also the instrumentalization, the co-opting, actually the good intentions of the civil society when Women, Peace, Security program was discussed and formulated. And I think also the period, these last 20 years, let's say, you can really observe the depoliticization of gender relations. And it's also kind of a hiding away power relations. It's using it in a more technical, mechanical way. It's kind of, sometimes it looks like gender washing. And I think the interesting thing is kind of shifting from actors, very politicized actors until 2000 maybe, and then slowly it went over into the big structures of the UN, including the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, who are also using Women, Peace, Security for the smart economy, giving women possibilities, etc., etc., etc. And I think, and I remember with White, we try to activate sometimes also feminists in other countries. And I remember very well, it was sometimes the feminists who would resist and exactly not enter these programs of Women, Peace, Security, because they would say, no, I'm against being co-opted. We want to have our resistance, or what Heidi was saying, against the mainstream cannot be implemented anymore inside this frame. So it's also kind of breaking apart the frame of women, peace, security. And I think this is interesting to see how the actors in gender issues is shifting from a very political group to a rather more technical and unpolitical group working for administration, for development, etc., etc. So it's kind of a no budget. We don't have budgets all the time. For years, we are asking for budgets to do some case studies from the civil society driven case studies. But no, there's no budget. Of course, there's no budget because women, when they ask for money. And so, I mean, but there are so many reflections now on women, peace, security. And I just hope that there won't be new resolutions because it's just a waste of time. That's about it. I'd rather prefer take my time afterwards.
Thank you very much for your answer as well. I will go on with the expertise of each speaker. So I will have questions specifically asked towards each speaker's expertise. And my first question is to Heidi. And what are the impacts of having increased military budget spending on the available budget for social welfare, gender equality, and environmental challenges?
Yeah, I could start with numbers, but I want to take you a moment in the background. What is the logic behind this? How money is spent in our societies? And just to quote in one sentence a piece of Bert Brecht that probably you all know, Mutter Courage. She said she had her little business through war. And she said in the piece, or Brecht let her say this, please don't say that peace has happened. What will happen with my business now? And this is really, it's symbolic for the business which is behind, and the winners, they are always in the arms industry and the big financial interests of politics of growth, and it's sometimes or somehow easier to make money with weapons, to produce them, to deliver these killing instruments, because then it's also the repair business behind, and it's partly this private-public partnership and states involved and giving the industry economic possibilities to develop also always a more high-tech weapons. And then sometimes it's justified that through the arms production, this may serve also humanity with in social possibilities, or getting water out of the earth, and all these kind of things. But it starts with the military business because it's easier to serve these markets, and the actual digitalization, the technical progress, the whole business of dual use, the gains of this arms industry is incredible. It was, and therefore I started also with the history. It always was in this direction. And one of our founding members, leader Gustavo Heimann, said the economy more than 100 years ago, the economy must serve the needs of the people and not those of profit and privileges. Here we are still, and I want to mention something. Yeah, we know the profits that the big war industry is making, especially in war times, and it's not just the industry, but also the political elite, which gives this industry the chance to make their profits and to justify the ideology. Now we have, for our security, we have to raise the budget, as the Germans did with 100 billion for the first day of the war. The chancellor announced this. Times have changed. Now we have to invest in weapons. The European left has made actually a quite interesting survey on I just know the German expression is Übergewinnsteuer, so the gains, the over achieving of the money profits that is discussed in our country now for the energy prices, but it could be also really realistic to get it from the arms industry because of their enormous profit. So the Russian invasion has really made given an enormous push to the arms industry worldwide. And I was really surprised how much materials, partly old materials, but also very new one, Germany had in big in places that we could have. We did not really send it quickly, but we are still doing this. We have all these old materials and coming from the Eastern Germany often, and then they justify that this is easier for the Ukrainians to take these tanks because they know how to work with Russian production and all these stupid ideology behind, but it's a big market on the other side. So just to wind it up with the costs that are needed and clearly needed for the worldwide crisis that exists, and this is again the same as 100 years ago. The women asked, it's education, it's health, it's poverty reduction, and yeah, in the last years, especially the climate justice and the funds going into environmental protection, they are the one which needs compensation and support. And yeah, this is the big fight for the money. And WILF has gone for years with this slogan, move the money from war to peace. This is it's the advantage of women to be closer to the human aspects of suffering and of crisis, to see where the real needs are. And yeah, this is where we are and where we need disarmament, just to not to fuel constantly this war machinery. And this is an argument which is nearly independent of the actual requests from also our Ukrainian partners to help for self-defense. The continuous escalation through weapons production and so on must stop. And this is my last thing. For example, on the negotiations on the arms, the prohibition of nuclear weapons treaty, this is for the first time really very interesting treaty, because the production, the distribution, the money with the nuclear weapons is combined in this, and we are struggling all together, I think, to let this ratify, because it's nuclear deterrence is the worst we can have, and we are quite close to this danger at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your valuable input. It is really important that we need to shift our focus from a profit patriarchal capitalist mindset to a feminist perspective analysis in order to reimagine the ways possible for a world for peace. And it's important to understand the connections of politics and economics in order to grasp and continue why we are currently in this conflict-filled world. So, Anne-Fleur, my question to you is that what is the relation between arms trades and feminist politics? And what does this mean from a feminist foreign policy approach?
Thank you so much, Denise. Yeah, so we see that there is a rising number of countries now that have launched a feminist foreign policy. The Netherlands and Germany are developing one as we speak. As also Heidi stipulated, I've also spoken to feminists that emphasize that people have the right to defend their lives and human rights, as in the case of Ukraine, and probably also as it has been in Syria when the international community armed the Kurds to fight ISIS. However, from the perspective of a feminist peace policy, arms trade is fundamentally contradictory to feminist key priorities such as human security. A human security approach focuses on reducing non-military threats such as social inequality, human rights violations, poverty, and hunger. And also, next to investing in human security, feminist foreign policy would need to invest in arms control and disarmament, as was already mentioned by Heidi. As feminists also emphasize that the possession of arms is not gender neutral. It reflects power and gender relations that fuel violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, and it is still strongly linked to traditional social norms that stand in the way of gender equality, such as the idea of the strong male protector on the one hand and the weak female that needs protection on the other. So investing in human security, disarmament, and the control of arms will be main priorities for a feminist foreign policy. So the Arms Trade Treaty, it was already mentioned a bit. It is the first international legally binding instrument that aims to alleviate human suffering through binding arms trade standards. And according to Article 7.4 of the ATT, the arms trade is illegal if the weapons in question are being used to facilitate or promote serious gender-specific violence. The only way to guarantee a decrease in gender-based violence is through consistent compliance with the provision of the treaty. And that is something that has not always been done. So when we look at the countries with a feminist foreign policy, none of them have actually stopped their arms export, nor have they put stronger arms control mechanisms in place. On the contrary, as was mentioned already, after the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, countries as the US, UK, Germany, and the Netherlands have been delivering Ukraine enormous amounts of weapons. France and Germany are even in the top 5 of countries that export arms worldwide. All of these countries signed the Arms Trade Treaty, but it's very unclear if these countries in the current arms race that we see have actually assessed the impact of their arms export on SGBV, so sexual and gender-based violence. We haven't yet seen public reports. So also the whole idea of arms export control is under threat from the EU's ambition to become a strong military power. The EU is already directing public financial resources towards the private military industry nearly without condition, with the explicit purpose to strengthen the competitive position of EU arms industry in the international arms market. At the same time, export rules are slowly but surely undermined. For example, much control over export of arms components has been lifted to facilitate inter-European cooperation between arms companies. So while more countries claim to have a feminist foreign policy, more and more, at the same time, they increase their military spending and decrease their arms control mechanisms. So the feminist foreign policies in these countries focus mainly on the non-political traditional gender equality topics, such as gender-based violence, women's economic empowerment, or women's political participation. If the security and defense sector is addressed, it is often in the context of diversity and inclusion in the sector. So more women in decision-making positions in the defense or security sector. So I would say it's not an either or. Even if countries would provide Kurds or Ukrainians with weapons, it does not relieve them from their plight to check what will happen with their arms, how it might impact women's and girls' safety, and to continue investing in human security, especially in this current arms race. So for the Netherlands and Germany, who are still in the process of developing their feminist foreign policies, it would be revolutionary if they would go beyond pinkwashing the security and defense sector and actually make political choices and thus invest in human security, in stronger arms control mechanisms and disarmament policies. They could be real frontrunners if they would launch a holistic feminist foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your valuable input. It is really interesting to see the dilemma between what is wanted and what is actually being done by countries, specifically saying that they are a feminist foreign policy. They're using a feminist foreign policy approach. However, it's a total, complete opposite when it comes to reality. And it's actually easy for countries to change that in the way of their perspective. And they are easily able to change the narrative of it. And for Anne-Marie, I wanted to ask, how are military budgeting and spending legitimized in nation states and across the globe? And what narratives must be questioned when discussing security issues from a feminist perspective?
Thank you, Denise. I have a slightly different approach to the whole topic because I think I'm wondering why it's so difficult, like UNFOR also said, until now, there's no decreasement of military spending, even though they have feminist foreign policies, because the feminist foreign policy normally is there where all the human rights on these soft issues are, while the trade departments and security departments are kind of out of this. So my question would rather be, what kind of narratives allows politicians to mocking around, like just telling people that they are more safe when there's more spending on military? That's one question. The second question would be, who actually defines and how is it defined what a risk means to our society? What is risky? What is a threat? And then finally, it's a feminist reading of financial flows. How would we read it? And I think just to get to remember, there's a huge difference between economy, feminist economics and capitalist economics, because the feminist economics, they really, we see the care and supply economy in the center itself of economy, like Heidi was quoting also. And it's not the benefit or the profit, which is all overarching principle of the capitalist system. So just having this difference in mind, feminist economics could never, ever accept feminist military policy. Armament can never be the military or the arms trade issues can never be feminist. They're always capitalist, and we know the capitalist system. It always finds new resources, such as labor force, cheap labor force, to invest more or to raise more capital. It's also about national resources, exploitation of national resources. And now we see in this current war, it's a lot of exploitation of fear, of feeling, of emotions of the people. Oh, tomorrow there will be a nuclear war, and creating this feeling of insecurity. It's for sure, everybody says, okay, armament is good, military expenditure is good because this makes me sure. And I think it's, for us feminists, I think one of the big challenges is to understand this huge legitimization gap between the augmentation of the budget in social sectors and the budgets for the so-called national security sector. Why is it so much easier to get the broad legitimization to spend more on military and armed forces? And sometimes I feel it's really co-opting the women peace security. We want more women in the army because it makes, and you know, all this discussion, having more women as soldiers should be more feminist in terms of changing the army structure. So I think we really have to understand how this legitimization gap is created, and also how it is used to spend more in. And the side effect, and I think this is also very important to underline, there's a very a tricky side effect, namely that by doing so, people not only feel maybe more secure because of the increased military budget, but also that they feel more secure in this national security. We belong to the national, to the we, and the we is the nationalist approach to economy. And I think this is also quite tricky in terms of feminist goals, because it really is re-cementing and reproducing all, as Dennis, I think you were mentioning that, the old patriarchal patterns of roles and so on. And we can see at the same time in family politics how it is kind of a retraditionalization of the roles. And I think we have to consider not just the military budget, but we have to consider from a gender budgeting perspective a global domestic budget, and see how the legitimization gap is being materialized in different budget shifts. And I think the narrative covering this distortion of security, for all its complementing complementing the war economics, it is a narrative of a very aggressive, ugly enemy. It's the Mr. Putin who is now the place where all the ugly comes from. And it's also a possibility to externalize the domestic problems. And it depoliticized actually the tensions and the social problems we have in our own society. So by focusing the negative, how do you say, inspiration, the negative energy, in a foreign context to other countries, then you can re-establish the security in a national way. We are the good, the we, and then you can observe also how this narrative is useful even to legitimize migration policy. You can say all those coming from abroad, they may also be a threat to our national identity. And I think from feminist perspective, I think we do not pay enough attention to the discursive, to this narrative level of making people believe, when am I secure? When is my safety given? And why do I not ask for a safety in daily life? people ask for more money in the health sector, for better training in the health sector as well, but also for better salaries for teachers, etc., etc. And this overarching fear of war just lets people forget in a way that actually their daily life is not threatened by Putin, but is threatened by decreasing money for social security, for social welfare, for the security scheme for elderly people. So I think for us, important to say, to finish, we should not fall into the trap of just looking at one budget, but we have to see the interrelations, the interferences of the different actually policy sectors, if you want. How to use the legitimization narrative in order to explain the spending in one and the decreasing the money in the other sector. And this is, I think, it's quite challenging. And I think it's a little bit maybe the root of understanding why we are still here where we are. We're not still here where we are. We are reproducing all the time where we are. And I think we have to be courage, have to have enough courage to break this dynamics in repeating, still we haven't come any further. Still we haven't seen any progress. So war economy, as I said, resists all feminist principles, even though if we want to try to understand war economies from a feminist perspective, this does never, except of deconstructing the whole issue of a national security construction, we would never get to any other or better or broader understanding of what is really happening. That's for the moment.
Thank you very much for your valuable input as well. It's really interesting to see that in my educational background, we always wanted to be critical thinkers. So we have to question everything. We have to question the narratives. We have to question the ideas, and we have to find solutions towards that. But it's very hard to actually question what is been given to us as a reality. We have been understanding nation state as a reality, war as a reality, and with this feminist perspective, we actually want everyone to question and to understand and to deconstruct what we have been seeing as norm. But it is really hard to do that, and we have to continue these discussions in order to question and unite together and find solutions. So my question will now go towards the practicalities of what could be the solution or what can be done in order to lessen the negative impact of militarization. And this may be a far stretch, however, if we can imagine and think about it, then maybe we can create solutions. So is there a solution for this increasing military spending to transform it in a peaceful way? And the floor is to Heidi, first of all, or if anyone else wants. Yes, thank you.
Sure. If I would have the solution, what we have to do, it would be great. But of course, there are possibilities, and one is really educational processes. We have to continue in this, and the whole sector that both of Anime and Anne mentioned, also the question of inspire people to think what makes me secure feeling secure, and and having this in a lively exchange with others. I think this is the basis. This might not sound very political at the moment, but it is. If people meet cross-border to exchange, to keep their solidarity networks, friends from the Balkan region told me that this was the only way that they had their network when the war came up. Also, they kept somehow the contacts in the transitional justice time, and they could meet and cry together, dance together, sing together. So all of these simply well-being events, also to see the others not as an enemy. What I find really dangerous at the moment is I participated the last days in Prague in a meeting where also we could listen to all the foreign ministers of the EU. They had this unanimous talk of an enemy, a clear enemy now. Of course, Putin is a criminal, a war criminal, and the effects, what he continues to do, it's nothing to balance this, but it's creating also the Russians as the enemy, and there is a mixture of old anti-communism coming up, as well as new alliances of the good ones, and those who have to win, and the other has to defeat, to stop the imperialism, they said. And this is something which this will not stop imperialism, especially orchestrated by new NATO membership, and the Finnish foreign minister, he is not a fan of NATO, but he sees that in his population, the Finnish population, the pro-NATO voices went up to 70% in some months only, because of the threat, of course, and the fear created around this. Nobody of this European political elite talked about the OSCE. This is gone. So and with this also United Nations are somehow gone in their political reality at the moment. And those who know more about the OSCE, they know that this is not, of course, the international paradise, and not the United Nations with this Security Council, which has to be reformed since a while. But so we have to really, and there are thousands of opportunities starting from the local level, and also to have these alliances between people from a country like mine who deliver weapons continuously to Egypt, for example, in a highly conflicted situation, and people from Egypt, from Lebanon, from Syria, Yemen, where the weapons create new crises. So this local international coalitions, plus the interventions on the OSCE level, on the United Nations level, on the Human Rights Council level, with the climate movement, the coalition between, or the the result of what is done to the environment through this war at the moment is incredible. It's not just for future violence, also domestic. It's for the nature, for the mines that will continue. We find still mines of the Second World War in Germany. So this is for generations. It's the big problem behind is that it's so logic for us. The knowledge is there, and we have our friends beyond the other borders, and it's so logic. And yeah, we don't have to give up. This is, I think, the most important message that we need.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we should never give up. That is really important to take a point from that, because it's very easy to feel discouraged, feel sad, and feel like there's no hope. But the only thing we can carry with us is our knowledge and our hope, and to see the transformation. It's also an interesting point that you brought up, that Europe, countries in Europe that strive with their sustainability and focus on a better world, a peaceful world, is causing many harm, actually, due to this war politics and war economy.
And the last diplomat, existing diplomat, is it's Erdogan at the end. This is just crazy, but he is the last one who still negotiates in this war. So it's, yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. And Flor, do you want to also add as well?
Yes, well, I really strongly agree with peace education and really investing in building a culture of peace again. I think before the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, we've seen a tendency. There was not so much investment, but at least it was it was one of the policy priorities of, for example, Netherlands, that you should invest in prevention, in disarmament, in control of arms, and that is now kind of, it's finished, or it's vanished from the agenda. And we also see that inclusive peace and security processes, always when there is a crisis, gender is an afterthought, inclusivity is an afterthought. It's, first we need to give them weapons, first we need to solve this crisis, and then we're going to think about the long-term impact. So I think it would be really, really, really great if countries with a feminist foreign policy dare to make political decisions and be holistic in their feminist foreign policy. So invest in human security, nourish and invest in building a culture of peace. Invest in national and subnational peace dialogues, peace mediation. And so next to the investing in stronger arms controls and mechanism disarmament policies, and definitely also invest in making sure that that children at school, that they that it's normal for them to not speak about the others, about the other or about their neighbors as being the enemies. So we see kind of normalization that nationalism is back in Europe, and with that also so many really bad things related to nationalism, and we've seen it also in other conflicts. Really making someone else as the enemy, that you're not, even as a feminist movement, that you're not even talking anymore with your neighbor feminists because they're from the other country. And also that children, that they still believe in peace, and that they still believe in that this can change. I think that's so important. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your powerful words as well. We need to continue to believe, and we have to continue to work together for a solution. Anne-Marie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just to give you an insight in what we did last year in East Ukraine, which is one part of our approach, and then we have a second focus. The first one is this women peace table method, and we created focus group discussions in the East Ukraine, in villages and in neighborhoods, about 5 or 6. And all the women, some of them knew each other, others haven't seen each other so far, and they were asked, when do I feel secure? When do I feel safe? And what does make me feel safe? And where are the gaps to be safe, to feel safe? And it was really very interesting because they spoke out what was tangible for them. And we would then together collect all these experiences in order to see together whether out of this descriptions we could maybe formulate a political request. And this was really great because then they had, okay, my everyday life is so scary because I never know if I can see the doctor or whatever. And then slowly, or scared to go outside because of violence in the public space. So slowly, they got all these tangible issues, and out of that, we formulated together political requests. And it was interesting because they felt like very, how do you say, capable of action. So they felt their activity, it's like an empowerment. Oh, my problem is like this, like that. I can do something against it. While this diffuse and blurring understanding of national security doesn't really help them in their daily life. So this was one, and it goes on. Even during wartime now, these women peace table people, they still meet, and we will now organize next women peace tables, first online and then hopefully also face to face. So that's one very practical issue. And the other one, I think we feminists, we have privilege. We have time to reflect. And not all people have time to reflect. So we need to use our time to reflect in analyzing, for example, and I just collected some of the important issues we should know a lot about, which is, first of all, it's really, do we know how the decisions are felt on money flow? How is the decision made on flowing money, of money flow to army or to social, to the social security sector? And then it's also about asking for or fighting for democratization of the decisions about these financial flows. And I think this is extremely, all the central banks, they just working in their very closed area without being forced to be transparent. So this is, I think, also very crucial that we know more and we ask for transparency in terms of financial flows. And also we knew a lot of economic literacy. We need economic literacy in tax systems. I think Heidi, she was mentioning at the beginning what these different forms of discussion now, increasing taxes for all those companies who make big business out of war, for example. And also what then another practical approach rather is, what kind of alliances do we need? The climate strike people, how can we ally with them, for example? That's just an example. And it's not so easy because they have their own narratives, we have our narrative, and somehow we have to elaborate a new language together in order to share our political initiatives. Yeah, and we have to create possibilities to get access to people whose voices are not heard. And I think this is probably the most important and difficult task, because participation of women in peace process, okay, fine. But when you look back, I mean, the majority, the very big majority of women participating in peace processes are women from upper classes, from the middle class, well educated. And I even know from women participating, they told me they couldn't go back anymore because the grassroots organizations of feminists, they wouldn't take me as from their surroundings anymore. So I think, how can we really make this transfer from the tangible experiences of insecurity to the political level, the very high level, and then back again in order to really do some structural changes for the daily life of women without much voice, because no power of decision making. So I mean, also it depends a lot on our possibilities, our resources, and our alliances. And I mean, what we are inside the OSCE, with the Civic Solidarity Platform Gender Group, with Heidi and many others, there's even though 2-3 years of Corona, it was a spirit of cooperation, a spirit really of working together, because we all have similar ideas, but still we need more efforts and more set initiatives into reality. And for this, it's really tough work sometimes. I think we really have to be very patient as well. Thank you. That's about it.
Thank you very much. It is important to question our privilege as well during times of conflict, and have the connection and include people from every background, basically, especially people who are vulnerable in the situation of war, in the discussions in order to achieve peace. With this said, I want to leave the floor to the audience, and I wanted to ask if anyone had any questions they would like to ask to our valuable speakers.
Oh, oh, am I still here? I am.
Perhaps you can mention again that people can also take the floor directly or just write something.
Exactly. If anyone wants to ask anything, you can directly ask, or you can write it in the chat function.
Perhaps people would even like to add their experience, their feminist experience in a specific situation. I think this would also be very much welcome by us.
So we have a question.
Question now. Yeah.
Yes, I'm reading the question now. Could you maybe talk about the feminist solidarity means in a context in which there are many feminists in Ukraine calling for more weapons to Ukraine?
Maybe I can just quickly answer. Our partner organization, my colleague, she says, you know, it's understandable now, but this is at the moment, and long-term perspective, they all know that it's not for always. It doesn't save my life, it doesn't make my life saver in the long run. So what we also need is to have safe daily life structures. And I mean, even if though they ask now for weapons. I would rather, from Switzerland perspective, I would say never ever sell any weapons. But if I'm also in a situation where I can say that I'm not under bombing, so I have to be kind of my role. What is my role, and what is their situation and their role? And I think it's important to make this difference also between different situations, different contexts, different roles, and then accept also different interpretation of fear and of danger.
Yeah, if I may add, I agree with that. So we work with women also in Ukraine who formerly were really pacifist feminists, really only focusing on dialogue, peace dialogue, and they changed 180 degrees in their opinion, because they are in a situation right now that they have to defend their own human rights, or at least they experience it as that, and I do believe them. So I think it is important to still be solidarity with those women as well. I agree. We have all a different role to play. As a Dutch platform, we have a very different advocacy role, and we can at least advocate for this holistic feminist foreign policy, this holistic perspective to both invest in human security and stronger arms control mechanism, disarmament policies, while you're maybe also trading or exporting arms. Yeah.
Just a short comment on that. I think one issue we are now trying to stimulate is to learn communicate about lived, about seen violence, and it's really difficult to talk about the violence when it is when you have lived it. It's even more difficult, but your friends or your neighbors, but how to communicate, how to describe, how to share in order to make it also public. And this, I think, is a big challenge, and it has to start now. It has to start now, because after war, then everybody tries to forget, and then we need this tracked information about the violation.
Yeah, I think there are extremely relevant experiences made by the women in the Balkan region, and also through organizations like Media Mondiale and others who from the beginning talked about trauma and some healing perspectives. On the other side, I think there are many possibilities of expressing solidarity with women who lost their jobs, who need also somehow financial support sometimes, but also they not all, of course, are ready to tell their stories yet, and this must be respected too. That especially to people who live like me still in a kind of paradise regarding the daily life, my daily life, and but this solidarity is extremely important also. And I read this in a very interesting text today, that we can just contribute to give them space to discuss between Ukrainian women, for example, because they have a lot of things to discuss, because they are also different. They and their husbands, partners are different. Some of them are fighting which they never wanted before. some of them, yes, they have a very clear decision that they fight for freedom and survival, and others just hide. So this is probably we need to help creating space that they can discuss between themselves also before we talk together.
On floor, I have a question. When you talk about peace culture, a culture of peace, do you think what I was mentioning before, this language of reconciliation, that this must be part of the peace culture? Can I talk about my suffering, but also in asking for kind of reconciliation? I don't know. It's really a question. I'm just thinking about it now.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about peace, building a culture of peace, I think it's both in the beginning of a process, so as a prevention of armed conflict, and definitely also during reconciliation processes. We've seen, for example, in Iraq, and I guess also in Afghanistan, but maybe Shakuva, who I know is also here, can tell more about that. That it's really important to give really peace education at schools. Also in India, in Sri Lanka, they really have some great experience on how that works for groups of children to understand each other again, and to make it more logical to discuss issues instead of fight issues. It's also really peace education for men, because they also have to, live up to that image of being the protector and take up the arms once there is a dispute going on. But then instead of taking up the arms, that you can also have dialogues. So it's through the entire, well, it's never this beautiful process of prevention, conflict, and then reconciliation, but in every phase of before and in and after armed conflicts, it's so important to maintain that focus and to invest in it.
I think we have different people from also really conflict regions. They partly have a different approach than we have. Perhaps someone would like to say a word. It's not just conflict really as a war, but a revolutionary spirit, or conflict like such in Poland for women's rights and so on. I saw there are people in the room. Perhaps someone.
Yeah, I think one of the participants wanted to speak. Kinga, I saw. Does anyone want to add? Okay, great. We cannot hear you right now, Kinga. Yeah, there's a problem with the noise right now.
There's a strong voice problem.
No, Can you hear me now or not?
Exactly
Yes?
now. Yes, right.
Okay. So I would like to say something about the countries which is neighboring Russia, because we have completely in different perspective that the people living, that the feminists living in the western part of our continent. So we have the not very good experience with Russia. So we understood what is going on in Ukraine. And then there is the different kind of solidarity, because we are afraid that the neighboring countries will be this another object to another goal for Putin's policy. So our approach to the providing the weapon to the Ukraine is as well different one. What I would like to say, and what is really worry for us, that for example in the Balkans, when it was the war, the feminists from the Balkans were able to cooperate together, even during the war. But it is not the case of the countries in the former Soviet Union. They follow the policy of their countries, and there is no the kind of cooperation with their neighbors in their feminist in Russia and Belarus now. So this is very pity for us to see that it was completely break. Even in Poland, we have several different nationality living. We have Ukrainian people, it is more than 2 million now. And we have the people, the diaspora of Belarus, from Belarus, and diaspora of Russian. And there is very difficult to cooperate with the Ukrainian because they refuse to. So this is quite worried. That's why we need to put the pressure on the solidarity, to how to build the solidarity between Ukrainian feminists and with feminists in the neighboring countries, just neighboring Russia. So this is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kinga, for your input as well. I think I also saw another hand that was being raised. Does anyone want to add anything? If so, they can have the floor as well. There is a question to Kinga. Not a question, but it's a mention.
It was me writing this because it's linked to the possibility we have at the end of September, beginning of October, around HDIM in Warsaw, to continue this debate, especially also with some people coming there from Russia, from Belarus and Ukraine. So this was just an idea.
May I just add something to Kinga? I think it is important also for us to recognize that in Russia, in wherever, in Belarus, there's so many different feminisms also defended by specific groups, and we are falling into this trap of unifying, of just seeing one feminism from Russia, one feminism, and it's kind of, I don't know. It's like where we find some order in a national framework, and I think we have to respect the diversity of feminist approaches, as between White Plus, for example, and other networks, which are maybe less political or whatever. So even when we have this discussion a few years ago about the abortion, and about the right for sex work in Spain, we had really a big clash, even though both were quite from feminist NGOs. And this is also different. How can we deal with these differences with opinions and political approaches, even though all these feminists come maybe from Russia, let's say, as an example.
Yeah, and the same counts also for Women Equals Men as a platform. So we have so many different organizations, even organizations that don't identify themselves as being feminist. So, you know, just working for gender justice. And so we definitely also see that, and also appreciate the fact that there are so many different feminisms. Really good to also emphasize the differences between also maybe Western feminism's streams and in other parts of the world, where there's also other context by which your political views are definitely also shaped.
And it depends also on the arena where you are acting in, on the level at which you are acting. If you are rather intellectual or rather activist or whatever, so I think you build your own field of influence with your opportunities, your resources, and your knowledge, and then you build the alliances based on these common resources. And they're different, with different experiences and different biographies. There's this difference coming out then in organizations and alliances.
We have a question and answer. If you can see, Louis has written something, and also, okay. Also, we have her on the floor, and also Stanimira had also raised her hand. So first, Louis, you can speak if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. I am Lois Herman with the Women's UN Report Network, and I want to first thank you for this excellent panel that White has organized. I'm also part of WILP, so I remember Heidi. And I know that WILP and WUNRWA have worked hard on a resolution, a UN resolution on the human right to peace. And it was especially through Ambassador Chowdhury, but this did not pass. And I guess they're going to bring it up again next year, but of course COVID got in the way, and yet it's still a very important issue to move forward at the UN. My 4 children are half Ukrainian on their late father's side, and so we follow the conflict carefully in Ukraine, and very much through the World Federation of Ukrainian Women's Organizations. And yet on the other side, and I lived in Italy about 10 years, is Salvini today said that the EU should stop having sanctions against Russia and create a more economic harmony. Excuse me. And then I have a question about Kaliningrad, which is like an island in Lithuania. And We rarely hear about that, and yet it has been a source of tension in the country of Lithuania. So just thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share those few words.
Thank you very much for your input as well. Stanimira, now you could also...
Thank you. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Oh.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, all the speakers. Would like to have much more in numbers, such kind of conversations. Yes, we feminists are different, not only in Ukraine, everywhere, especially in Europe. And I would not suggest to speak more about women from the ex-Soviet countries and women from the Western countries. Ladies, it is already after 30 years time to speak in one voice, or try to speak in one voice. Yes, I would support these suggestions to have more education on culture of peace. But this education and training should be done also not only in schools, but among our women, especially among women in the political parties. I was working for 10 years for political empowerment of women at the Balkans after the wars. No, we were not at the table of decisions before the wars. Not too many, even I can say not at the table during the war. But after the war, just like one of our speakers says, at the time of reconciliation, we had this chance to be there together and to work together, to know each other, to exchange many experience, information and thoughts. Now it's time again to try to set up such coalitions and to speak more and more, to involve more women in these conversations, because they are, at least in Bulgaria, they are so silent. For example, you cannot hear many women voices to talk about the war in Ukraine, even to express different opinions. By the way, men's voices are also not so much, they are afraid to talk. Why? Because if you have different opinion than the official one, you will be labeled as Putinist or the other label they would put on your face. Why? We have to talk. We have to see why this war started. I really will express now. I know that most of you probably will not agree with my opinion, but knowing Putin and his system, I'm completely sure that it was a wrong decision in the very beginning to try to involve Ukraine in NATO. Never Putin will give permission next to his country, especially Ukraine, to enter in the NATO. I would, if I was in power, I would suggest different way. Try to involve Ukraine in European Union. Try to work on the democratization of the country and on the well-being of the citizens, not to push them to enter in NATO. It was absolutely, for me, obvious that Putin will start this war. I don't know what you think, but it already happens. Now, what women voices to support more weapons for Ukraine. I don't know. That will be long, long war in this case. But anyway, for sure, I think that we have to talk more often between ourselves. These webinars were very useful. And let's give opportunity for many voices to be heard. Nevertheless, politically, how was the impression? Politically, I forgot the name in English. In order to political Western or against. To be very honest, I'm not happy with the decisions of our leaders. I mean, European Union leaders. Sorry for this not very optimistic expression, but it is optimistic because we started good dialogue. Let's go on. Let's do more talks, and actions will come very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input as well. As we are slowly coming towards the end of the webinar, I wanted to ask if the speakers want to add anything else to wrap up the discussion. The floor is any of yours.
Shall I start, or do you want to start, Heidi?
No, go on.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would like to applaud the final comments of Stanimira. Sorry. I think it's very important to continue these discussions among each other. I'm very so I also saw that there's some people in the chat also listening in that are also from governments. I think it's really important that also representatives of governments are also joining these debates, because they're also in the end developing the policies where we are talking about. So I really would like to emphasize and also invite both civil society and government representatives to have these kinds of discussions and really have this kind of, we call it in Dutch benen op tafel sessie. So really informal sessions where we can have these dialogues without that you need to commit to anything. Yeah, I really look forward to the follow-ups. And thank you so much for hosting, Denise and Gea from White Plus.
Thank you.
May I just, Heidi, you want now or after? Okay, I just want to tell you that we are planning a global women peace conference, probably 24, because we think that it's not only lack of peace culture. We always talk about this security architecture, but we want to apply for a peace architecture. And I think we also, Stanimira motivated me also. I think the political literacy to work with local, intermediate and national politicians is extremely important. What is peace? Why do you always think about peace is to have more weapons? So to really to open the floor to rethink these associations and connotations. So we will continue by working in these kind of meetings. It's great. Absolutely. Thank you, Stanimira and Kinga also. Yeah.
Yeah, from my side, I think the fact of keeping the dialogue is already inviting also to some optimistic view that we can promote mutual understanding and this is the basis for, and listening to the others, this is the basis for also keeping a kind of courage of commitment that we need to resist, and we need the resilience in this situation, especially in war times, where also the pacifism is kind of discredited because it has again failed, what people say, or our minister for economy said this is a faraway dream. Why in a situation of war, pacifism is a faraway dream? No, we have this dream, and we do all to make it happen somehow, from our very local family context to an international context. And of course, we need to learn from each other. And I think this way of looking at the peace architecture is really important, integrating the experience that people made in situation of violence and war and conflict and discrimination and violation of human rights, and so on. This is, I'm somehow, after these kind of discussions, I'm rather optimistic and not too pessimistic. I think this is, it's good to do it. And therefore, thank you, Denise, also, and Gea, that you have organized this, because this forum play a role.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you. So as we close up, I wanted to also remind the audience that we have upcoming webinars, especially this week and next week. And so follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Facebook, and you can check our website, and you can contact us via email to join White Plus and get to know each other better. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for all of your comments. And it was such an enlightening webinar that I have learned so much about personally as well. So I want to thank all of the speakers, Anne-Fleur, Anne-Marie, Heidi, for your time and your knowledge. So, and thank you, Gea, for organizing as well. Goodbye, everyone.